fear is a prophet spirit from hell.
Yes.
Sent to give you a negative report of the future so that you will make a fear-based decision that God won't honor. Mm-hmm. That's what fear is.
That's so good.
So the devil would come to me and give me premonitions of me failing. Well, I never felt in the natural, I would fear and deal with all this fear and stuff. Well, then I get out there and everything would be fine. So when Joel asked me to come speak for him, immediately I began to have fear. Well, so I tell people, you'll never overcome fear until you deal with it as a separate entity. It's not your fear. God didn't create you with that fear. He would never do that. It is whatever avenue the devil uses, trauma, rejection, whatever avenue the devil uses to the open door, he uses and comes in and fortifies a natural fear that we have.
Yeah.
There. So you have to deal with it as a separate entity. So here's how I dealt with fear related to Joel. And so every day when I started having this fear, I would say, demon spirit of fear, I bind you in Jesus' name. And I will not let you talk to me. I will not let you minister to me. You're a demon spirit of fear and you're a liar. And I pray, Lord, for power, for love, and a sound mind to be over me right now. And so I prayed every day before the morning of I went to speak for Joel. Now, Joel had in the 11 o'clock service, he had 12,000 people in there live in that basketball arena that he has. And so I preached on Saturday night, then I preached twice on Sunday morning. Well, but the big service was the 11 o'clock service. So Joel gets up and he's introducing me, and I'm sitting there with my whole family's here, And so I'm getting up speaking. I never had a twinge of fear. I got up and spoke and enjoyed it, just stood up there and spoke. And I got down, and while I was speaking up there, I kept thinking, why am I so peaceful? I mean, I just don't, I'm just comfortable and, comfortable with people. Got finished, and so many times I would be tormented by this fear, not knowing it's a demon spirit.
Right. Wow.
God hasn't given us a spirit of fear.
That's right.
It's a demon spirit. And so you can't educate a demon. You can't domesticate a demon. You can't train a demon. You can't counsel a demon. You can just cast the little sucker out. Mm-hmm. And we have authority. Everybody right. Listen to this. You have authority over the devil. So when a spirit of fear comes to you and you begin to have these premonitions, this prophet spirit comes, you have these premonitions, and it begins to change your personality, change your decision-making, compromise who you are, compromise your ministry, and all that kind of stuff. You've got, nobody can do it for you. You've got to stand up to it. You've got to speak to it. And so since then, since I had that episode, I've never again and I've had fear since then, but I just deal with it.
Yeah.
And I know it's a demonic attack. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's important to acknowledge too that, as pastors, what we like to do, not just pastors, I think everybody does this. We don't want to say we have a spirit of fear, so we'll say, well, I'm just stressed. Yeah, I have worry. I have anxiety.
Yeah.
Stress, worry, and anxiety are all versions of fear.
Yeah.
And it's that fear.
That's exactly right.
You were talking about that 2 Timothy. I actually had pulled this up just earlier. The verse just before. So, of course, 2 Timothy 1:7 is, for God's not given us a spirit of fear, that you just quoted. But the one right before it, this is verse 6. Paul says to Timothy, this is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you.
Yeah.
For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but a power, love, and a sound mind. So the very context of that verse is, an apostolic father talking to his pastoral, spiritual son. You need to get some faith. You need to remember to fan into flame that gift you've given. Don't let that spirit of fear hold you back. Don't let worry, anxiety, all of those things. And the enemy attacks. I mean, the enemy is overwhelming. I mean, I remember, you and the elders laid hands on Kim and I to become senior pastors on a Wednesday. And on Monday, as a church, we got a $50 million lawsuit filed against us.
On the front page of the paper?
On the front page of every page.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Welcome to ministry.
I said, Jimmy, that never happened when I was there.
Exactly. I think I called and offered it back to you, and you just laughed. So, because that's what the enemy wants. The enemy wants to overwhelm us with things so that we're just so worried and so stressed. And Kim and I have really been working through, really trying to understand, especially the worry and anxiety piece. And one of the things that we've really learned on that is because, all of that raises our cortisol levels, puts us in that fight or flight mode. But one of the amazing things is as your amygdala gets stimulated, in that fight or flight, we actually lose the ability to creatively think and problem solve.
That's so good.
Because we're more focused on, survival, and you're trying to look for when's the next shoe going to drop, and when's that elder going to come harass me, and am I going to say something on stage that's going to get me in trouble?
Yeah.
And so we start looking for all those things, and you lose the ability to creatively think.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things the enemy wants to do with that spirit of fear.
It paralyzes.
Is it paralyzes us and keep us from hearing the Lord and creatively solving problems.
I remember hearing years ago, Pastor Cho, at that time, pastor of the world's largest church. I think about 800,000 people, small, struggling little church over there in Korea. But he was asked one time in a panel, what's the greatest gift that a leader can have, that every great leader that you've ever known has had? And he said, it's the spirit of faith. Every leader has to have the spirit of faith. Well, if you think about that, what's the counterfeit to that?
That's
it's
exactly
the spirit
right.
of fear. And when you are operating, whether knowingly or unknowingly, out of a spirit of fear, what is happening is exactly what you said. The enemy is painting a demonic prophetic vision in your heart about the future. But when you are operating out of a demonic counterfeit vision, you can also operate in the spirit of faith and get a prophetic vision from the Lord.
That's right.
So much of why as leaders we have to contend with fear is obviously it's on a personal level, but we can't operate in the spirit of faith at the same time we're operating by a spirit of fear. Yeah. So we're giving up the greatest asset, the greatest facet of the anointing, which is the spirit of faith.
If I could go back in time, I would not have ever normalized fear in my ministry because it was there for so long.
Right.
I made so many decisions that were fear-based decisions. Even as the church was growing, we were making some good decisions, but just on a personal level. Well, let me say one more thing. We can address one more issue before we end this podcast. A lot of my fear came from an orphan spirit. My father issues, and my dad growing up, he wasn't in my life. He was in the house. He just wasn't in my life. Never touched me, never talked to me, never came to a ball game or anything. He was just there. In my concept, we develop our concept of God mostly from our fathers. God put his image on Adam and Eve and then commanded them to multiply. So parents are image bearers of God to their children, whether they know it or not. There was a book written that's called Faith of the Fatherless by a guy named Paul Vitz. And the premise of his book is all famous atheists hated their fathers. That Nietzsche, Freud, all of them. And the reason they don't want God to exist is they wish their fathers didn't.
Wow.
Their hatred for their fathers. So there's a direct correlation of our concept of God. Well, my concept of God was he didn't know who I was. And it was evolving over the years. And I thought, God knows who I am. And so as a pastor now, I'm dealing with a big budget, a lot of needs, building buildings, doing all those kinds of things. Now, it would be many years in the future before I'd wake up one day and realize that my anxiety and my fear was all rooted in a mistrust of God. I nagged at God. I was like a bulldog on a chain, just thinking, why don't you go faster? Why don't you? And I was just always frustrated. And I woke up one morning and I said, and I was embarrassed. And I said to the Lord, I have always doubted your goodness. Because part of the fear there is I'm on my own. An orphan spirit.
I have to make this happen.
I've got to make this happen.
Yep.
Is God, I don't have, see, if you came to me and said, okay, here's your father, Jimmy. He's the wealthiest man in the world. He's the toughest guy in the world. He's the wisest guy in the world. He adores you 24 hours a day. He's there for you. I thought, I don't have any problems. I'm all good. But if that God is behind a curtain and I really don't know him very well, I've heard of him and I think he's good. So a lot of our fears many times are just rooted in the fact that we really don't know how loved we are.
Yeah, that's right.